Hi, everyone. We are back with A Brighter Future Starts Here, live weekly show brought to you by the American Society for the Positive Care of Children. Back with one of our favorites, Dr. J. Harvey. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Tracy. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I'm eager to
Right.
find out some more information.
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
Yeah, always picking your brain. So,
Indeed.
so the questions that we have for you today revolve around COVID or flu vaccine or both. It's like, right, all that
Yes, indeed.
information out there. So this basically stems from the fact that I was surprised to find out that everyone in my family, myself included, my kids included, that we all needed the flu vaccine. I was like, well, we all have the COVID vaccine. Isn't that enough? So, wherein I reached out to you and said, isn't that enough?
Not exactly. COVID-19 and flu are different viruses, and therefore require different means, to afford yourself protection. And the vaccines themselves are also, different in the way in which they generate immunity within you. So, from the very beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of when we knew next to nothing when everything started, there was a lot of um, fear about not only what happens if you catch COVID, but what happens if you catch COVID and influenza at the same time.
Mm,
And nobody really wanted to know the answer to that because in the beginning, people were dropping like flies from COVID and everybody was panicked. And obviously, the flu, which tends to get short shrift because we've been living with it, for such a long time and we have a vaccine. Um, the flu can cause considerable havoc and generally does every year, with the exception of last year when people were not interacting, when they were wearing masks and
mm.
distancing. Um, I had personally a grand total of 0 cases of influenza during the last cold and flu season, which
Wow.
is like literal like zero.
Yep.
Uh, yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, that's a wow. So for everybody that wants to pretend that masks and distancing don't do anything, clearly that's not true. And we knew it's not true, but yet that type of myth still persists out there. So this year, obviously, things are different now because kids are back in school in various places. Some of the protocols and restrictions are starting to be lifted. And really, from the moment things started to kind of loosen up, um, we saw an immediate uptick in surge in many of the other childhood viruses that we really hadn't seen in quite a while. And there was really no other explanation other than the fact that people were starting to come back together indoors in particular. So clearly, this year, given the fact that, people are starting to rejoin society rather readily, the expectation is we're not going to have 0 cases of flu. And obviously, we still have Delta virus circulating, other mutant potential out there for COVID as well. The colder weather is coming. People are going to start going indoors. People are going to travel for the holidays. They're going to fly. They're going to be with family. All the stuff that they had put aside and not wanted to do or were frightened to do last year, that's probably not going to be the case during this holiday season. So the potential for all this good news that we've had over the last few weeks to suddenly not look so good is there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be gathering. Do you think it's because they think that we're in the clear, or do you think that it's because of what you said? They're going indoors, the cold weather's coming, people are congregating indoors.
I think it's both. I think in particular, like it was just a short time ago over the summer when Florida had literally the highest number of cases in the nation. It was pretty good sized disaster where we almost were back to, you can't fit anybody in the hospital and they're turning people away. And you read all the stories. This one guy went to 42 hospitals. He died of a heart attack. It was pretty bad. But now If you're watching the news and reading the reports, Florida has the lowest number of cases in the nation, at least for the moment. Probably because there's not too many people left to infect, but obviously there still are. I'm just saying that tongue in cheek, but so with that, yeah, I mean, people do feel better. And I don't know if they feel like we're totally in the clear. I hope they don't, because that would be fool's gold. Uh, but things are clearly, markedly different than they were even a month ago. So people see that, and obviously they want to be optimistic. They want to rejoin their normal life, and they want the kids to rejoin their normal life. And so they'll latch on to that, and that is in part, I believe, what's causing a lot of the reluctance or hesitancy with regard to the pending approval of the COVID-19 vaccine for kids age 5 to 11. I think the perception of risk has turned in terms of how, I mean, well, from the beginning, if you go back to the beginning, the message through public health was, well, kids don't get it as much, kids don't get as sick, if they're otherwise healthy. And obviously everybody took that, and it was true for the most part, certainly. Everybody took that as obviously a silver lining, a blessing. God, what if kids were just as adversely affected as adults or the elderly? So that certainly was a good thing. And I think that contributed to kind of a sense that people have, like, COVID, no big deal in kids. It's like the flu. They'll get it. They'll get over it. They'll be fine. COVID, right? Exactly. It's like, my grandma should get it, but my kid, if they get it, they'll get a cold, and they'll be fine. And now that the cases are down, and obviously a lot of people have been immunized, although not nearly enough, I think, again, that combined with the fact that there's still this perception that the vaccine is too new, it was rushed out, or, it's all part of some, God knows, conspiracy to microchip people or control people. You put it all together, and some people just are not going to get it for their kid. Some people wait because they're, but someone else, just let me see, their reaction and whatnot. And yeah, I think it's a combination of reasons why people are hesitant, but I think the biggest ones are probably just distrust of, big pharma, government, et cetera, combined with a perception that if a kid catches COVID, they're just not likely to get very ill. And I think that is largely true. But if you look at some of the numbers, again, if you drill into the numbers, just specifically, just even for the 5 to 11-year-olds that we're now talking about, there's been over 2 million cases of COVID-19 in the 5 to 11-year-old age group, about 8,500 hospitalizations. A third of those led to ICU hospitalizations, and somewhere between 100 and 200 deaths in children between the ages of 5 and 11 just so far. So then the next question becomes, well, how many child deaths are acceptable to you if we actually have a safe and effective way of preventing it? And to me, the answer is none. But to a lot of people, they're willing to roll the dice. They just don't see it. Maybe it hasn't hit a family member or a friend where they had to live through someone suffering or dying, as a result of COVID-19. And yeah, they're just kind of, the whole perception has flipped from fear of the disease to fear of the vaccine, which is remarkable when you consider how many illnesses and deaths vaccines have presented in the 50 or 60 years of their existence. And especially when you consider that a lot of these people, their kids have had all their vaccines. So they're not just anti-vaxxers who are like, well, my kid's not getting, any vaccines. A lot of these people, the kids have had all the recommended shots, regular schedule. I'm sure that they wouldn't recommend, let's stop immunizing against measles or, polio or whatever. seems like they've done a real good job. When's the last time you heard of a kid getting polio, whatever. But of course, that was commonplace, in the era before we had vaccines. And I think, to me, another big part of the problem is most of the people who are hesitant, reluctant, or anti, they didn't live during the time where we didn't have vaccines. And I think their perspective obviously would be quite different if they had. And I don't think they would choose living in a vaccine-free world versus the alternative. So it's a lot of different things that lead to this concern. Parents, obviously, they want to protect their kids. I mean, that's our number 1, 2, and 3, job. And that's the job of the pediatrician is, prevention. Let's protect and prevent. So then it comes down to, well, where does the parent really feel the greater risk lies? And if you feel like the greater risk of harm to your child is through getting the COVID-19 vaccine as opposed to getting the disease, what are you going to pick?
Wow.
Yeah. So these are the things that we work very hard every day to try to overcome. But again, that relates to trying to have a conversation, A, B, not being judgmental, C, having that rapport and that trust where you can listen and try to understand, where the apprehension and the concerns are coming from. Usually wise to validate those concerns and not try to make light of them or, wave them off. Because that usually just, pushes people further apart. And then you try to fill in the blanks with some actual data and facts. And, you hope maybe over time you can kind of sway them, but it's tricky.
Yeah. I think it's very important to listen to parents' concerns and to validate that they have the concern. It's not that we're validating misinformation, but we're validating their actual concern for their children's well-being.
100%.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. You have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once pertaining to the hospitalizations and unfortunately those 100 or so deaths, were those due to underlying conditions?
In some cases, yes, but not in all cases, no.
Necessarily?
Wow. Yeah, and certainly now that vaccines have been available to others, the death rate in unvaccinated versus vaccinated is at any age range is, and same for hospitalization, the difference is enormous. So look, that's the other thing. Are vaccines a perfect solution? No. Are they ever 100% effective? Not yet, not so far. Are they ever completely side effect free and without any possible negative effects? Nope. So again, that's where the numbers game and your risk tolerance and your perception of risk, if you will, all starts to come into play. And a lot of parents, from what I'm reading and hearing, seem to be wagering that they are going to, at a minimum, wait on their 5 to 11-year-olds and kind of see what happens, which of course is their prerogative as a parent. But I think the other factor that comes into play is they're very focused, obviously, on their child or children. And most adults have been very focused on themselves. What we lose sight of is the so-called greater good. And what happens when people opt out or wait or don't get vaccinated is, in reality, everyone else suffers. Because the whole goal of any vaccination, obviously, is to reach a certain level of immunity, the so-called herd immunity, where the virus can no longer, do any harm or damage. When you have these pockets and spots where people aren't doing it, that doesn't happen, as still hasn't happened in this country. And with COVID, the rate of mutation, for this virus seems to be pretty prompt and pretty steady. And the longer these gaps and pockets exist, it's just fertile ground for another new variant to possibly, not predicting doom and gloom, but to possibly, mess up all this, progress that we seemingly have made to date. So there's a lot of different ramifications. And again, some people don't want to hear about greater good. They're only, what I need to do for my child, children, whatever. And again, that's their prerogative, but it isn't necessarily the fastest way to end a pandemic. That's for sure.
Right. And it also doesn't help when you have officials, government officials, who are divided on the topic, because if it's supposed to be for the greater good, then it should be all for one and one for all.
100%. And I mean, that gets back to one of the original points we made about the opposing and competing points of view, conflicting
Mhm.
information, not just from elected officials and people in the media, but, as I have many parents tell me, they did their own research. And depending on, where they're getting their information, whether it's from, Face Group Moms Club or CDC, like they're going to get, wildly different versions of, the
Yeah,
truth. And then it comes down to, what do you believe? Who do you trust?
right.
And that's a problem in this country right now. Even we as pediatricians, I mean, when I started practice, there really wasn't a lot of, questioning, if we recommended something, by and large, there really wasn't a lot of pushback, or there might have been some questions, but nothing that seemed to be like challenging. Do you really know what you're doing? Do you really know what you're
Right.
talking about? Is that really the best thing, for my child? And now there is, almost on a daily basis. So, look, I'm not one who thinks parents should just follow like sheep and just do what you're told and whatever. No. It's healthy. It's good to ask questions. It's great to be informed and make informed decisions. But at the end of the day, if you're going to a pediatrician who you, in theory, trust and like and whatever, it doesn't mean you have to listen to everything they say clearly, but something like this, you would hope your opinion would carry, a little bit of weight, a little bit of gravitas. And sometimes it does, and sometimes
Mhm.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it also has to be a good fit between a parent and a pediatrician.
100%.
Yeah, and just from a personal experience, I think I might have shared this with you previously, that I had been going to a practice where there were two partners. And after about a year, one of the partners was out for the day. And I saw the second partner, who therein said to me, "You're neurotic. My partner is a little neurotic. It's not a good fit. You need to be my patient." And he was really genuine about it. He wasn't just trying to get a patient, it was one
Yeah,
practice, but he
yeah.
was really genuine about it.
Mhm.
And that happens though.
Oh no, the fit is crucial. There's no doubt. Like if you don't feel like you could ask any question and get a legit, honest answer, or if you feel like you're going to be, parent shamed or whatever the case may be, yeah, that's not a good fit. So you're right. You have to be not only confident, obviously, in the knowledge or the basic competency of the doctor,
Yes.
but you got to feel like you could talk to him. 100%. That's correct.
Yeah, you have to build a rapport. Like you were just saying, that know, like, and trust. If you don't have the know, like, and trust with your pediatrician, who are you going to have it with? That's like the first person you should have the know, like, and trust with.
I agree, because it's supposed to be the best. The best relationship is a partnership, where you're literally working together. You don't have to see eye to eye on every single thing, but you should at least be able to talk about it
Yeah,
without any, again, fear of retribution or judgment or whatnot. And if you don't have that relationship, then you should seek it.
very valid points. You
Yes,
definitely have to feel comfortable with your provider.
no doubt.
Let's pivot for a second.
Yeah.
We have a question regarding the flu. Every year, so this is probably going to come out incorrect, but you'll help me frame this up. Every year, there is a variant of the flu that's chosen to administer the vaccine. So, how does that come into play if that variant is wrong and now we've got COVID on top of it? It's almost like turns into a big mishmash. Can you help us decipher all of that?
I can, yes, and I shall, yes. Uh, so it's not a secret, not in the medical world, nor really in the general population, that although it's good that we have a vaccine to protect against flu, no one, even at the highest levels of medical science and public health, thinks we have an ideal flu vaccine. And the one of the main reasons for that is exactly what you were just describing. And that is every year, there are numerous strains or variants of influenza as well. And every year, groups of people, epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists, not just in America, but around the globe, have the awesome job, the wonderful job of trying to predict which strains are the most likely to waft into our hemisphere during the so-called, cold and flu season. I know I wouldn't want that job, that's for sure, because honestly, a gust of wind, at the last minute, and you're not looking like the smartest guy in the room. Now, there's 4 strains that didn't used to be, but now we've expanded the flu vaccine so that there are 4 different strains of influenza that can be matched or put into the vaccine every year. So that at least that's better than 1 or 2 or 3, because now we got more chances to be right, obviously, than to be wrong. And that's the current situation. But obviously, even at that, and I don't pretend to know all the methodologies that they use to make these predictions. That's probably a step above, throwing darts at the dartboard. But in some years, as people are quite aware, the matching of strains in the vaccine to what actually circulates is not so good. And therefore, the protection from the flu shot that year is not so good, which obviously frustrates and disappoints people, as it does we who are providing it, that's for sure, and getting it for that matter.
Right.
Other years, it's better, and the matches are better. Also, in some years, even if they aren't exactly right, we are lucky and we get what's referred to as mismatched strain protection, meaning we don't have the identical strain, but if it's close enough, we get a little bit of protection, even though it's not a perfect match. And that sometimes can help the numbers, a little bit, but that doesn't happen all the time or every year either. So at the end of the day, that's the mishmash. And when you add to that a decision has to be made in terms of what 4 strains are going to be chosen for that season, because then the vaccines have to be manufactured. And once production, starts, and again, the winds change, whatever, you can't undo that. And they say, oh, no, time out. We're going to back that out. And we're
Change
going to,
our minds.
yeah, we change our minds. Right? No, it doesn't work like that. So they make their best guess. They have their deadlines for doing it. The production, wheels go in motion, and that's the flu shot, you get for that year.
And that's what you get.
And that's, and again, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. Certainly everyone knows we need a better vaccine. And the good news on that is a better vaccine is coming.
Oh,
Yes.
that's good news.
It is good news. It may well involve the mRNA technology, which we can touch on, the current COVID-19 vaccine technology. But it all boils down to all of these different techniques for creating immunity, all boil down to different proteins that these viruses possess, and trying to pick proteins that are going to disrupt, if not kill, their ability to reproduce once they get inside your body. And there's been a lot of research, a lot of people trying to figure out common proteins across a wide number of influenza virus strains so that we can not have to get a new vaccine every year. In other words, if they can find this commonality and applies to enough strains, you could get one shot, and then maybe you need a booster in 5 years or 10, but you don't have to do this repetitious process over and over again every year. And I think that is coming soon, not tomorrow, but within the next 5 to 10 years, I would say.
It's kind of like having one shampoo, but different brands. So we know what gets the hair clean. Now it's a matter of maybe the other ingredients, or some are herbal and some are, more medical, or right.
Yeah. Or finding, the one that, because not everybody's hair is the same. You know what I mean? Finding the best match. Do you have dry hair? Do you have oily hair? And so you try to find some commonality amongst all those varieties that'll do a good job for as many people as you possibly can. So that's coming. But so we still need protection against flu. I mean, numbers wise, before COVID, millions of people obviously get the flu every year. A lot of people are hospitalized. Somewhere between 1 and 200 children every year die from complications of flu. Again, way more elderly and people with other health conditions for sure. But nonetheless, if you have a potential means of protecting a child with a reasonable degree of, safety and certainty, how many child deaths or hospitalizations are you okay with?
Mm,
And the answer should be not very many, in my opinion. So,
right.
right,
None. How
yeah,
about none?
that would be best. Yes.
What are the current guidelines for both the flu and COVID shots administering to children?
Yeah. So, per usual, we recommend flu vaccines for any baby or child 6 months of age or older,
Mhm.
on into adulthood. The very first time, as of now, that a baby or a child gets a flu vaccine, if they're less than 9 years old, they actually require 2 doses spaced a month apart in order to be fully protected.
Mhm.
Uh, so once they get that, then each year it's just a single dose. So that recommendation hasn't changed at all. In fact, we're probably recommending it even more strongly coming into this season, knowing that we're probably not likely to be, as lucky as we were last season where we really didn't have any flu.
Right.
And again, there haven't been very many reported cases of influenza and COVID-19 together in a single individual. But again, I'm thinking nobody's super anxious to see how well that might go. So again, the more people we can protect, obviously, the better off we are.
Yeah. And how long between the flu and the COVID shot? How long do we
They
give?
can be given together. There's
Oh,
no
really?
contraindication whatsoever. They can be given the same day, next day. They're perfectly compatible.
Is there any time that you wouldn't give either of those shots, the COVID or the flu?
Flu, there are some kids and or adults who can be allergic. So you certainly wouldn't do it in that instance. Um, Rare. There might be certain forms of, in general, we like to do it for kids who have heart disease, diabetes, asthma, those kind of things. There may be some heart conditions where the kid is very compromised. You might wait or hesitate to do it, but for the most part, it's widely recommended. And
Mhm.
for COVID-19, uh, the panel is going to meet for the CDC today and probably decide by tomorrow whether formal approval is going to be given for the 5 to 11-year-old age group.
Mm.
Obviously, we already have, 16 and up is universally approved. 12 to 16 has the emergency use approval. And yeah, they'll probably announce tomorrow. We all expect that they're going to approve or recommend COVID-19 vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds. And then everything's already kind of ramped up. So probably by next week, those immunizations will be available.
Wow, this is all hot off the press.
Hot off the press.
Wow,
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the misconceptions that parents come to you with?
Well, there's a lot of misconceptions about COVID-19 vaccine. Starting from, I guess I'll just start from, well, it's too new. And, it just was rushed out and they didn't study it enough. And that's why we just don't know, what's likely to occur either now or, somewhere down the road, some delayed effect that we're not aware of. And I think what most people, although more people now, but most people didn't understand, and some still don't understand, is that although the COVID-19 vaccine certainly came out way faster than just about any other vaccine that's ever been invented, it's not like they just said, "Oh my God, we're in a pandemic. We need to make a new COVID-19 vaccine. Let's hurry up and make that and have it out by the end of the year." That's frankly impossible with at least our current state of knowledge. So there was a lot of work being done on so-called mRNA, vaccines for a decade or more prior to this pandemic. And in fact, even if the pandemic had not occurred, transitioning to mRNA-based vaccines in the future was an eventuality. there was no need to speed the process. They were wandering through as they normally do. But then the pandemic came, and that was rather a big deal. And obviously, especially in the beginning when we knew so little and the deaths were just, stacking up in parking lots and, whatever, there was motivation,
Yeah.
to try to find something, as quickly as possible. And the government obviously threw a lot of money in the direction of big pharma and vaccine manufacturers to motivate or incentivize them to get to work. Because,
What is
yeah,
what is mRNA? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what does mRNA stand for?
you really want me to tell you. M stands for messenger,
Okay.
and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid.
Oh, okay. How it's communicating between the cells.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay, got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. DNA, obviously the basis of all our genetic material and all that. But you got to have RNA come together first so that, yeah. So it's the messenger. It carries basically instructions, if you will, for how a cell can make certain proteins. So that's how it works.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So isn't it true that it was a global effort with teams of scientists and doctors working 24/7 round the clock? And that's
Yes.
stuff that we don't see.
You're correct. That's a huge difference that a lot of people are not aware of. Also, like if an American pharmaceutical company is trying to make a vaccine against anything, the last thing they're going to do is share their proprietary information with a competitor. Why would they? There's a profit motive. Hopefully, there's some altruism to do something good as well. But at the end of the day, there's shareholders, there's a profit motive, and they're not going to do that. All of that went out the window, as it should have, during a global pandemic. And you not only had U.S. companies partnering together, but across the globe, internationally, there was pretty much universal cooperation for the most part. So you can imagine if, like we had that all day, every day, just like if people only use the internet for good, what an amazing thing it would be. So in this case, the world did manage to pull together, and as a result of that, and all the dollars that obviously were flowing in their direction, which took the risk out of it for them in terms of investing zillions of dollars and coming up empty, which many companies did. There's only a few that actually got there. That was the impetus, and that's really the only way it could have gotten done. Now, that said, were as many individuals tested as normally would be tested under ordinary circumstances? No. Several thousand, yes, for sure. And that's part, I think, of a legitimate gripe that some people have. So maybe it wasn't brand new and a new discovery, so to speak, but because of the timeline and the interest in getting something out as quickly as possible to try to help with the pandemic, there just wasn't the time
The trials and the studies.
to recruit as many participants as perhaps they so instead of I think there was 2,000 or 3,000 on one of the Pfizer studies. It might have been 5,000 or 10,000 under like ordinary circumstances.
Mm.
Yeah. Could that greater number perhaps reveal not a severe consequence, perhaps, but something that you might not be able to uncover with just 2,000 or 3,000, kids?
Anomaly.
Absolutely. So I get that, but at the end of the day, again, under the circumstances that were presented, it's true, you may not have all of the data and the information that you would ideally like to have to make a decision about, okay, we're going to recommend this for this group, for this age, whatever. But do you have enough information to say it's reasonably safe and effective versus this is now an almost never before seen circumstance where a lot of people are falling ill and dying, hospitals have no room. Do we have enough to say it's safe and effective? And at the end of the day, that's the determination that they made. And I would say thus far, that's bearing out pretty nicely. which is not to say that people haven't had side effects and adverse effects from it. They certainly have. The biggest thing with children that parents are aware of is the potential for heart inflammation, so-called myocarditis or pericarditis, as a side effect of COVID-19 vaccine. And that is legit. And I think we may have touched on this in the past, or maybe we just talked about it ourselves. But
Right.
um, that's legit. That is like it is a side effect that is tied to COVID-19 vaccine. So many times I think the perception of the general public is like, because that's, you hear anything with the heart, that's going to get people's attention,
Yes.
obviously.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people think that that would be the type of negative side effect that would just be, swept under the rug and left out of the data and whatever. Fortunately, it wasn't. And there was a good amount of transparency about it. In fact, they dug into it, pretty quickly and pretty extensively, and determined, yeah, that's not an accident. That is attached to the vaccine or a potential consequence. And now we know uh, that it occurs roughly in about 1 in 100,000 doses, which is not 1 in 1 million. It's 1 in 100,000, roughly, they think.
Underlying conditions
Say that?
with underlying
No,
conditions.
just
Random.
taking underlying conditions out of the equation, the relative risk so far is about 1 in 100,000 doses of the vaccine.
Okay.
So you yourself can decide if you think that's good or bad, but that's about what it is. But the other thing to take into consideration, of course, is the majority of the cases were in kids, kids and young adults between the ages of 16 and 23. I think in total, there's been about 800 plus cases of heart inflammation reported tied to the vaccine directly. And the vast majority of those recovered with taking ibuprofen and resting, within a day or two. Some did get hospitalized and had to be monitored, for more severe effects. A few that they're still tracking have had some lingering effects, but nothing that has rendered them, bedridden or whatever. So it's not a good side effect. It's something that parents have to be aware of.
Sure.
But it's one that doesn't occur often and seems to get over with fairly quickly. By contrast, if you catch COVID-19, people are also aware that children are susceptible to what's called MISC, multi-system inflammatory syndrome of children, whereby they can not only get heart inflammation, but inflammation of the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, typically way more severe and potentially life-threatening. Not the
This
case.
is the first I'm hearing of this.
Oh, yeah. So MISC, when it first was discovered, probably about a year ago, that was a panic. Because before that, kids, either weren't getting sick or weren't catching COVID. And then they started identifying a few cases. And then all of a sudden that mushroomed, and these kids were in the ICU. And it was pretty scary. It got everybody's attention, that's for sure. And I forgot the total number of cases now, but there have been several thousand cases of MISC in children. Again, majority of kids recovered, but not all did. But certainly from a standpoint of severity, comparable to what you might get from a side effect of the vaccine, they're just not comparable. Far worse.
More drastic.
Yeah, far worse from the disease itself than if you happen to, be unfortunate enough to have that side effect from the vaccine. So again, what's your belief? What's your perception of risk? Again, if you really put the facts on the table and you're weighing the scales, the vaccine seems like a much smarter choice to me, but not everyone is seeing it that way.
Do you ever have parents that won't accept the vaccine for religious reasons?
Yes.
Or not necessarily? Oh, really?
Not COVID-19 specifically yet, although I'm sure that will likely come up. But for other vaccines, yes, we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something that's a little near and dear to your heart, which is really arming parents with critical information that they need so that they could make their most educated and best decisions. Right? You're very, very passionate about that. Yes.
Yes.
So, what types of misinformation do parents come to you with? Like, what are their feelings, their emotions, their concerns?
That's how this I must have segued. That's the original question you asked. What are the misconceptions and
Yes,
misperceptions? Yes.
yes, but this question actually has an element of that emotion. Like
Yeah.
what I'm really asking you is like, are they coming confused? Are they coming panicked? Like, what is that feeling
I'll
that a
give you
parent has?
I'll give you a couple. So one in the beginning, I don't know if it's so much now, was that because the vaccine is termed an mRNA vaccine, there was this perception that somehow it was going to harm or alter your body's DNA.
Oh,
It alters your DNA, turns you to who knows, whatever. This is a fallacy. The DNA in your cells is stored in the nucleus of the cells, and the mRNA never penetrates the nucleus of the cell.
got
In
it.
fact, it's eradicated and broken down once its message is delivered rather quickly and is just eliminated from your body. So
Wow.
originally, there was a fear or an apprehension that mRNA, it's going to mess with my DNA, and I'm going to, I don't know, turn into a cyclops or something. I don't know.
Right.
So that was one. Another one that was really tough for some moms were moms who were pregnant because obviously the vaccine became available to them, and a lot of moms felt they getting the vaccine would put them at high risk of having a miscarriage. And again, I'm not exactly sure where that got started, but that has been looked at, studied, and is just simply a fallacy.
Debunked.
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 Absolutely
Good.
debunked.
Good.
No increased risk of miscarriage. Multiple studies have demonstrated that.
Good.
Then other ones, moms who are considering if they haven't had children. I had people who I know fairly close to me, young women who hadn't had families or had children yet, were reading or hearing that it could affect their fertility. That perhaps they wouldn't be able to conceive or have a child if they received the vaccine. Again, don't know where that got started, don't know how that got started, but that was a legit fear, anxiety
Sure.
that I talked to several people about as well. And then you get to some of the more,
Was that debunked? Was that one debunked?
totally debunked. No
Oh,
effect on fertility, no effect on losing your baby, if you're pregnant. In fact, moms who are pregnant and contract COVID, they don't do very well, and their babies don't do very well.
okay.
So it's even more emphatic now to try to get them to receive the immunization if they're pregnant. And on top of that, it's now been proven if they do, antibodies that they generate in their own body will cross the placenta
Oh,
and
that's
get
good.
into their baby before birth.
That's
Uh,
wonderful.
that's awesome.
Wow.
So likewise, have breastfeeding moms, moms who have maybe opted not to get the vaccine, during pregnancy for whatever reason, who are now breastfeeding and fearful of receiving the vaccine because of the effect on their breastfeeding baby. Again, don't know exactly why, other than just general anxiety or fear about unknown side effects of the vaccine. But in fact, we now also know that breastfeeding moms who get vaccinated can pass antibodies that they produce in their own body through their breast milk to their
Great.
children. Seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
So those are a lot of the biggies if you want to steer clear of, the embedded microchips and, things the government is doing to track you and control you and
Conspiracy
take
theorists.
away your civil liberties. And, those are different arguments altogether that, in my view, don't carry a whole lot of weight because they're just outlandish and, in my view, untrue. But other than that, I think those are some of the bigger concerns and misconceptions that existed.
What do you think the two polar opposites are for parents? Meaning, like one group feels completely this way and the other group feels completely that way, yet herein lies the balance.
Sure. So I think the polar opposites are, for me, well, if you come from the central standpoint that or the central premise that most parents have their child's best interest at heart, want to make a good decision, an educated decision, a right decision, to protect their child from harm. I think on one side, the people who are, say, fearful or reluctant or don't want to get their child vaccinated, feel like if they make the decision on behalf of their child and their child gets vaccinated and something bad happens, they won't be able to forgive themselves because they permitted something to be injected into their child. The child had no say in the matter. And now their child has whatever, whatever disease they think they may get, or whatever, whether it's the heart, whether it's neurologic, whatever they perceive, could go wrong, a developmental issue. Again, not really any basis in fact, but just a general fear that perhaps something will be discovered that we don't yet know about the vaccine that could permanently damage instead of protect their child. They're like, I couldn't forgive myself. I couldn't live with that. Whereas on the alternative, if their child in that same situation were to catch the disease and get very sick, obviously they wouldn't be, happy about that. But some people, I've heard them say, God's will, whatever. If my baby catches it, it's God's will, and hopefully he'll, recover and that kind of stuff. As opposed to, oh my God, my baby got very sick or died from COVID-19. I could have done something to prevent that from occurring. So those are kind of that's a polar opposite way of looking at things. One is kind of fatalistic. If it happens, it happens, but I'm not going to proactively inject this foreign substance, into my baby that I don't know all the, things it might do to him now or in the future, versus there's a pandemic that's killed over 5 million people and 750,000 people in America. Oh, I'm going to take my chances and see what happens.
It sounds like the conflict is an active decision versus a passive decision.
That's part of it, I think. Yes, it is. But I think at the end of the day, again, if we assume the central premise that everybody wants to do right and protect, it's, what do you fear more? Do you fear the vaccine and its potential ill effects, whatever they may be? Or do you fear your child actually catching the disease and suffering some untoward consequence from that? At the end of the day, if you boil it all down, whatever you fear more is going to ultimately, I think, guide your decision making.
Wow. So just to recap,
Yeah.
It sounds like whatever the concern might be, if it's the concern about the vaccine affecting a child's heart, or if it's a concern about a vaccine having an adverse reaction, it sounds like overall the statistics favor getting the vaccine.
Not even close. Yes, correct. Yeah, if you just stack them side by side and take away all the chatter. And that's true of virtually every vaccine that we have been giving in this country and around the world for a long time. We all want a risk-free solution to everything. But if humans are involved, that's not going to happen. There's always human error. There's always, idiosyncratic reactions that just can't be accounted for no matter how long you study something. And so we do the best we can. Maybe we can do better. I have colleagues who are very extremely pro-vaccination, but believe additional safeguards can be put in place, going forward to make them even safer than they currently are. Absolutely. If you can make it as safe as we can make it, that's what we should do. There's no question about that. And there shouldn't be any compromise for profit motive or, I think that's a common fear that behind, all of this is, the almighty dollar. And look, to some degree, it's true. Does corruption exist in that arena? Sure does, just as it exists in just about every other facet of life that we are engaged in, unfortunately. So, but it's really bad when it comes to public health. I mean, and you look at some elected officials, some of them, in my opinion, it's disgraceful. The number one job of any leader of any type of government entity or agency is the health and well-being of their citizens. And to politicize or, have monetary issues, cloud judgment or slant things in one direction or another is just a grave injustice to our children, and should not be tolerated. Yet seems like it is in some corners. And if there's anything that I can do to stand against that, I will do that.
Dr. Harvey, we appreciate you and your time so much. You are a speaker. You're popular with many of the moms groups on Facebook. We appreciate you taking the time that you take with the American Society for the Positive Care of Children, and our show, A Brighter Future, starts here. Are there any last thoughts that you want to leave our audience with?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words and for the opportunity to have what I think is a really engaging, interesting conversation about this kind of complicated, material. Hopefully, we're simplifying it and helping people make better decisions. And I think at the end of the day, if I have one message, it's vaccines are kind of the cornerstone of pediatrics. They're the cornerstone of how we prevent illness and disease. And I think our focus in medicine and health in general should be more towards prevention than active treatment of diseases once they occur. And while vaccines may not be perfect, I think they are not only the fastest and best way out of this horrific pandemic, they're the best way to safeguard our children going forward in the future. So that would be my message.
I love that. Vaccines are the cornerstone. You heard it here with Dr. J. Harvey. Thank you so much. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, they can find you on LinkedIn. You're very active on
Yes.
platform, always sharing information. So you can find Dr. Harvey here on LinkedIn. And again, thank you so much for your time. You're always a pleasure to have on the show. Our time always goes by so quickly.
It really does. I agree. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you for having me. I really appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Absolutely. And congratulations, by the way, on your new appointment to the board of the American Society for the Positive Care of Children.
Yay.
We're so pleased to have you on the board. This is so fantastic. So thank you for your time and your commitment to families everywhere.
It's a pleasure, and it's an honor to be part of the board for sure.
Awesome. So to our audience, if you or anyone you know are doing wonderful, amazing things in your community, we would love to hear about it. We'd love to interview you. We have a new statistic that I'd like to share, is that year to date, we have over 600,000 visitors who have visited our American SPCC Learning Center. So please join us, come aboard, support us any way you can, and visit AmericanSPCC.org. Thank you again, Dr. Harvey. Thank you to our listeners. And remember, the brighter future starts here.